All right. Well, look at this. We get bad sound, bad lighting, dirty whiteboard, the whole 9 yards. But we're going to do it anyway. So I'm thinking about the software industry and this idea of what we did to the industry, or what happened to the industry. So you've got a situation where your software engineers are like the smartest people on the planet, and therefore you want more of them. So you try to get more of them. Like, how do we make more software engineers? Well, we drop the requirements a little bit. Maybe that's okay at the college level, but then we start training them differently, right? Boot camps, 6 week boot camps. Yeah, we can just use the same number of training hours, but do it quicker. No, you can't. Anybody knows like that's not the same thing, right? Like reading a book in a week and reading a book in 2 months is very different experience, right? Um, Binge watching TV show and watching it, one episode a week, very different experience. And when you're learning, you need that integration time. You need time to take in the information, figure out what to do about it, right? And now we're like, oh, no, what we're going to do is we're going to take kids, we're going to train them for 80 hours over 2 weeks, and that'll be the same as a computer science degree over a couple of years, where they're getting the same number of hours of information with a lot more time in between. Everybody realizes this isn't a good thing. At the same time, we've got a change in management, right? So the way we're managing software engineering now is time boxed. It's agile. Agile is a problem for me. Look, agile was designed for a 10 or 15-person company, and if that's what you got, maybe that's the best way to manage your project. I kind of doubt it, but whatever. Uncle Bob Martin has done videos on this, talks about this. Nope, that was why it was developed and how. And these extreme programming techniques are great for small teams, single teams. Agile doesn't scale to multiple development teams at all. It just doesn't. Sorry. I'm not saying there aren't ways to try and make it work, but my goodness, it does not work. And I've tried all of them, and none of them work well. There are much better ways to do that work. And so that's part of the problem. People don't realize that. And then they're busy trying to crank out software engineers. Uh, in the old days, we didn't make the tent bigger to make more software engineers. We had this clear, bright line of you have to go through this rite of passage, this learning, this school, whatever it was, to become a software engineer. It wasn't free. And we just made the tent bigger and watered down software engineering. So now we have way more software engineers and they're all terrible. Like, that's no good. I mean, there's a few good ones out there, obviously, but it's harder and harder to find them. And they're in a sea of bad engineers and they're correcting the errors. And so we just have less good software everywhere. With way more software, it's a flood. Less good. That's the problem. And at the same time, we've got these educational changes, right? We've got these changes in who we're letting in, right? We've got these changes in management. We're not holding up standards anymore, right? At the same time, we change the standards for the software. It's time boxed. It's you need to show usable work in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it is. Doesn't matter. Like, why is that good? Because in release, it's a trade off. Every software release is a trade off. Do you want quality software or do you want it on time? You're not getting both ever. It's never going to happen. If you want software to be of a certain quality, you can't predict what time it'll be done. Sorry, just the way the world is. I've never seen it work, ever. I'm not saying people don't get lucky, but that's not repeatable. Luck is not repeatable. And you could argue, well, if you slow down your process enough and you have enough good developers, yeah, maybe. How are you going to measure all that? You're not. You're not. And I'm not saying people don't. People in the past did. They released quarterly. You had a quarter to get the software to a certain standard, and they'd do it. And then you can, oh, well, look, this is highly inefficient. The software engineers aren't working, 40 hours a week every week. No, they're not. That's true. But your quarterly releases are solid. and they're great and they're bug free and your customers never see an error. I've seen that. That happened. I've been at companies like that. I had a company, they had a QA team. And one day I was like, what does the QA team do? Because we had built a test. This is way before anybody had such a thing. This is in like the late 90s, early 2000s. We had a test harness of a test suite of over 1 million tests. And it ran on all of the platforms back when there were multiple Unix platforms every night. It took 12 hours. It was way more than 1 million tests. I forget what it was. But anyway, we had a whole integration testing suite, not unit tests. Unit tests are garbage. Integration testing suite. So basically, the software didn't have any bugs when it got to the customer. It just didn't. So one day I was like, what does the QA team do? Like, the QA in this process is really automated and it's really good. And I was part of running the infrastructure for it. And my buddy was like, oh, no, they found a GUI bug the other day. And I was like, the QA team finds visual artifact bugs. That's what they do. They don't find any functionality bugs in the software at all. It was that well tested from an automation perspective. No one's doing that anymore. No one. This is in the early 2000s, late 90s. Fully automated test suite for integration tests. Would go in, uninstall the old version of the software, install the new version of the software. So that means it tested the installer too. Wouldn't that be cool if people actually tested their freaking installers, right? Then ran all these tests with the software running as though a user was using it for real, because this isn't browser-based garbage software, although you can do it that way too. In fact, I know how. So if you need to know, I can tell you. And then, like I said, it took 12 hours. It was an overnight test run for sure. Computers were slower. Also, it was big software that did a lot of stuff, designed chips, chip design software. And like it worked. Like the test coverage was like 100%. That was in the early 2000s, late 1990s. I worked for two companies. Well, one of them didn't quite achieve 100% test coverage. The test coverage was high enough. It didn't really matter. The other one did. It actually had 100%. And yeah, the QA people were catching typos and misalignments on the screen. That's what they were doing. They never found a technical bug with the software, the results of the software. Never happened. It was all pre-tested by the time they got it. So these platforms and systems were built by hand back in the day. We didn't have all these fancy tools, all of which I've written personally by myself, incidentally, because it's not that hard. Oh, look, Ansible. Oh, look, Puppet, Chef. Like, we used to write those things. Like, I used to write a new one every time I got to a company. It's really not that. You have to be a software engineer to do it, but it's not that hard. Like, it's real low level stuff, or not low level, low skill stuff from a software engineering perspective. You want to write an advanced search algorithm system, that's a different thing. But you want to write a domain-specific language for scripting some process or building automation. That's really not that hard. And it's not trivial by any means, but it's also not the most difficult thing. And so now we've just got a flood of software engineers. We don't have those differentiations that we had before, where software engineers, we had IT guys, we had the network experts, right? And everybody had their own jostling and lanes to stay in, right? And everybody was a professional, right? Now it's just software engineers do everything. The problem is software engineers don't know networks. They don't understand systems. And if you look at cybersecurity, which wasn't in industry 10 years ago, that should tell you something. You see all of these break-ins. Almost none of them are buffer overflow errors. That doesn't happen very often, right? They're configuration problems. What is a configuration? Software engineers don't know about configuration. You have to understand operating systems and networks and firewalls and all kinds of things that have nothing, routing, all kinds of things that have nothing to do with programming. They're not variables and recursion. They're not algorithms. They're not CS topics at all. In the old days, they might have been. And you've got all these people, they don't know what they're doing. And you have no specialists. You just got a big tent of software engineers. Now, the myth of the full stack developer. I know so few people who can do good or any GUI work and code a backend. Forget about the middle tier, right? Forget about just underneath the UI. You know, oh, software engineer, I'm full stack developer. I've met full stack developers like, what did you write? And they don't do full stack development. They don't even understand the stack, much less play in all the pieces of it. And yeah, we keep squishing it, compressing it, flattening it down to just software engineer. Like, that's absurd. You want specialists in backend and algorithms. You want specialists in mid-tier. You want specialists in the interface that's going to be interfaced to the UI. You want UI specialists. Otherwise, you get garbage software. And that happens all the time. And you want QA people who know how to test. And that's all they know. They don't have to know how to code, although almost every QA engineer is at least a very good scripter. And you want people to do infrastructure scripting who cannot code. And in the old days, look, if you were in IT, if you wanted to get over to CS, sometimes you could, and sometimes those people were very successful, but sometimes they weren't. But most of the IT people I knew back in the day, they didn't want to be computer software people. They wanted to be computer infrastructure. They want to be systems engineers. They wanted to stay where they were, right? You want to make money in computers right now? Don't be a software engineer. Be a DevOps engineer. Development and operations. You are between those two things. It's the best named thing in computer science, and we're ruining it. But DevOps, yeah, you're neither a developer nor an operations guy. You sit in the middle. Software engineers don't understand operations, shouldn't be allowed anywhere near it. Honestly, you can just read the articles about software engineers that changed something in the database, and it was the production database, and they blew away all the data for the company. It happens all the time, still. All the time. And what are you doing expecting these software engineers to understand security? They don't understand security. And when you're on a tight timeline, you don't want to build security in your software. You don't even want to think about it because it slows down development. It's a trade-off. You want fast development, or do you want them to develop in a total secure environment where security is built in? You can't have both. It's not an option. You can't just open a new port every time you want to do something. Now, there are ways to secure things where your developers can open arbitrary ports in your system, sure. Those come with their own sets of problems, though. And it's a trade-off. It's not a free lunch. There's no free lunch in computer science. There's no free lunch in production. There's no free lunch in testing, QA. There's no free lunch in any of these things. Like, you are moving things around and changing where the complexity is, but you've made a bigger tent instead of keeping a building with tight controls where only the good software engineers are good software engineers. And now there's so many software engineers, good luck finding the good ones. And they're buried fixing bad software engineers' bad work to get their good software to work. I've seen it. It's no good. So now we just have less good software, but more software overall. This is not a good situation. And it's getting worse. Like, I don't see it turning around anytime soon. These videos aren't going to do it, that's for sure. But look, that's the problem when you go after a big tent instead of keeping your secure building secure. Right? Instead of having standards and boundaries and saying, no, you suck at software engineering, we're not hiring you. All right? Or, yeah, you're a software engineer, but you need at least 5 years experience to even be anywhere near the important code. Here, go do this other thing for a while. Like, it just is what it is. And Uncle Bob Martin talks about this. With Agile in the old days, what they did was everybody came from some other discipline. They were an accountant, or they were a business specialist, or whatever. And then they learned programming. So they understood procedure, understood hierarchy, and they understood process. They understood these things. They understood business in general. And then when you leverage something like the ability to automate processes using, we'll say, abstraction, because a scripter doesn't generally need abstraction or low-level abstraction, rather than a higher level abstraction that an actual software engineer needs. Then you can take that business process and streamline it and make it extremely efficient and build beautiful software. That's true. Uncle Bob Martin has talks on this. You can look them up. They're 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, something like that. I forget. We don't do that anymore. We're just cramming these guys through, with nothing, with no experience. And they're so disconnected from the business, they're just looking at problem solving from an engineering perspective and not even a real engineering perspective. It's the engineering perspective, somebody who understands a little bit of variables and recursion. It's not good enough. So look, I'm not proposing a solution. We're kind of doomed here. I can fix it. Go back to the way that worked. We know what that is. No one likes that answer, but it worked. Can you work within a quote agile environment and still make good software? Of course you can, but you can't do it using only agile management methods. We've made the management so simple and easy for these undertrained software developers. It's a big problem, and we're not accounting for it. But think about it. Don't expand your tent. That's no good. Keep your standards. Keep your building in place and at the same size. And just keep up those standards so that you know who belongs and who doesn't. You need a new category? Build a building for that category. Don't expand the tent.